Fawcett writes some tremendous analysis in the National Observer. And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, just Google, Bing, doesn't matter to me what search you use, the National Observer, because every single piece is thoughtful. And for some of us who don't get all bent out of shape because of ideology, I don't put myself in any of the brackets, conservative, progressive, anything. I'm just me. And just being me, I really appreciate people who do their homework, like Max Fawcett, and the kind of analysis they deliver. His brain just never ever stops thinking. So that's the National Observer, where you'll find Max Fawcett, and every now and then you'll find him here on the podcast as well. Max, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back, Charles.
Max, you're based in Calgary, and I know that we can discuss this in a way that is relevant not just to Albertans, but to people across the country. We've got different interest groups, shall we say, who are trying to penetrate school boards. And I don't know if the average person, whether it's an Albertan or anyone else in this country, understands just how vulnerable the school boards are to being penetrated and how much this affects our social safety net. Because if you can get into the minds and hearts of children, you can change things. That appears to be what some right-wing activists like David Parker in Alberta, it appears to be what they're all about, that they're not exactly hiding their objectives to dominate, to absolutely run school boards. Why are they doing this?
This is all part of the culture war that they feel is, their calling right now. I think people like David Parker feel like for a long time they've kind of been losing the culture war, and part of losing it has been that they haven't contested what is going into our curriculum, our education, as intensely as they should. This has been going on for a while. We saw this under Jason Kenney here, where there was a big kerfuffle around the new curriculum, and it ultimately got sent back to the drawing board because it was kind of transparently backwards, for lack of a better word. It very much sought to teach kids about ancient Rome and all these things, and was conspicuously quiet about things like Indigenous reconciliation and the history of Canada. But I think conservatives understand that this is an important battlefield in their ongoing culture war. Conservative politics right now, whether it's in the United States or in Canada, it's not about lower taxes or smaller government the way it was for most of my life, most of your life. It really revolves more and more around things like trans acceptance, LGBTQ issues, education, schools, these really culture wars things. And if you want to fight that fight, obviously you need to have people in the provincial legislatures and the federal parliament, but getting them into the local level and especially into the school boards is a very powerful perch. And it's one that has traditionally, I think, been not depoliticized, but it has not been as intensely political as it's about to become. David Parker, the head of Take Back Alberta, fancies himself. He's put pictures of Napoleon on his profile. He's used quotes from Napoleon. He really does fancy himself sort of our own little Napoleon. The one thing Napoleon never did was tell the Russians he was going to invade 2 years before he started marching on Russia. And he has essentially told progressives in Alberta, come the next municipal election, come the next school board elections, we are coming for you. So progressives have that, the time until the next elections to get their act together. These people, the David Parkers of the world, they mean what they say. They will come in numbers. And if progressives don't come in the same numbers, they will lose control of those school boards, and they will lose control, not necessarily of what's being taught, but of how it's being taught, of a lot of little decisions at the school level that can add up to big changes in how kids are educated.
Actually, let me take this to the other side of the street. Is there something that progressives are doing inside the various school systems in Alberta and other parts of this country? Is there something that's being injected into the school systems that is making them vulnerable to conservative attack? I'm not trying to blame the victim here, but I'm always asking myself, in this to and fro, what's the other side delivering to conservatives? Is there some kind of product that they're putting on David Parker's plate that is so tasty for Napoleon, as it were, that he just can't help but bite into it?
Yeah, I think there's a kernel of truth to what people like David Parker say. I think it is true that um, schools definitely promote a message of inclusion, of tolerance, of progress, of change. They're trying to educate kids to be part of the world that they're going into, not the world that existed 20, 30, 40 years ago. And a lot of parents find that really threatening. It was ever thus. I think back to when I was in high school. You could definitely accuse schools of teaching us that it was okay to accept gay people. I don't think anyone thinks that's wrong now. In the same light, I don't think anyone's going to think in 20 or 30 years that it was wrong for schools to teach that it was okay for kids to be trans or to explore their gender identity. But we are in that moment now where it feels scary to a lot of parents. And people like David Parker are very good at weaponizing that fear. It's funny. He says so many crazy things on Twitter. It's hard to really pin down just one of them. But he mentioned something to the effect that there were Marxists in schools right now that were trying to brainwash your kids. That's not new. When I was in high school, I had social studies teachers who dabbled in left-wing politics. I'm sure it has been that way for a long time. That's just sort of the nature, especially when you get a social studies teacher. They're going to want to teach kids about everything, not just the orthodoxy of markets and the importance of following the rules. Sometimes you have teachers that push kids to be a little bit rebellious, and you can't protect kids from that way of thinking. They should explore it. They should experiment with it, try it out, see if it fits. It probably won't, but I think essential to the worldview that David Parker and the folks like that are espousing is a fear of the modern world, a fear of change, and this idea that you can, if you wall your children away from it, if you put them in private schools, you put them in home schools, if you keep them away from popular culture, you can protect them from what do they call it, the woke mind virus. And I hate to break it to them, but they have this thing called the internet. The woke mind virus is everywhere, and it's called progress.
So let's talk about progress. A parent confronted me the other day because felt I was too hard on some of the conservative activism in the schools, and said, Chuck, if you had a 7-year-old daughter going to school, whatever, public school, private school, religious school, doesn't matter. It is a 7-year-old daughter in school, and all of a sudden, boys were coming into her washroom because they felt that the progressives running the school were now giving them the message, if they feel like girls, they can just use the girls' washroom. How would you feel about that? I thought to myself, it can't be that out of control. But I don't know for a fact. I don't know what's going on in every single school and every single washroom. I never thought in a million years that I'd be asking this kind of question. Is it that loose?
No, it's not that loose, especially at that age. I think what folks, the fear mongers, do is they take, one example or one sort of reported case of this. I think back to the litter box example where, parents were worried that kids were suddenly like identifying as cats and they had litter boxes in school and what was going on. And I think that happened in one school, maybe somewhere, and it was sort of spun up to be this thing that's in schools everywhere. One thing I know about teachers, and I know a lot of teachers, good teachers, not so good teachers, they all are careful with kids. Their overarching kind of guiding principle, the reason why they became teachers, is to protect kids, keep them safe, help them grow. They're not careless about this stuff. And so the idea that they're just sort of empowering 7-year-old boys to go into the girls' washroom and be inappropriate, it's just not how it works. And I feel like a lot of folks who are so nervous about what's happening in schools, number one, talk to your kids, ask them, but maybe do a bit of research that isn't coming from people who have a pretty clear agenda where they don't trust public education, they don't support public education, and they want to undermine public education. That's the funny thing about these laws that are being brought in by conservative premiers, where the schools have to tell parents if kids are identifying with a different pronoun. You shouldn't need the schools to dime out your kids. To me, if I needed my school to tell me what was happening with something that central to my kid's identity, I would take that as a failure of my own parenting. Better than worrying about what people like Ezra Levant or David Parker are saying, just keep the lines of communication with your kids open. Talk to them. Have a seat at the table. Let them feel like they can talk to you as much as they can talk to their teachers. Because if they feel comfortable saying one thing to the teachers at school and another thing to you, that's not a great reflection on the relationship you have.
Well, I'm always trying to put myself in the other person's shoes. In this case, in a teacher's shoes, and I'm just thinking, if I'm teaching, whether it's grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, whatever. If I'm teaching young children, and I'm telling young boys that if you're feeling like a girl today, you can use the girls. Well, I can't imagine myself saying that, because I can't imagine not receiving a bunch of pushback from parents questioning my sanity. It just doesn't make sense to me that teachers would be doing that. I mean, I'm talking about teachers writ large.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the note that I always get from my teacher friends is, look, even if we wanted to impose some sort of agenda, or we wanted to brainwash children, we're too busy to do it. We are so under-resourced right now. Some of my friends have upwards of 35, almost 40 kids in one classroom. They don't have time to prepare for their other classes anymore. We've put so much on teachers, especially during COVID. They are frantically treading water, just trying to keep up with the basics of making sure the kids are there, making sure the kids are paying attention, teaching the curriculum, getting them out the door. The idea that they have time for this sort of mastermind agenda that they're going to implant into these kids' brains, it just beggars belief. These people who are saying this haven't spent enough time around real teachers who do real teaching. If they have an agenda for these kids, it's that they want them to be accepting of other students, kind to other students, and curious about the world. And curious about the world means open to new ideas. I know that is scary for some people, that they want their kids to kind of just be little educational widgets or educational robots. But a successful education makes you more open to the world. And maybe there are pluses and minuses to that, but I don't see how it's in the best interest of any kid to not get a good education and not be exposed to the world that they're going to have to go live in.
Max, are any of the teachers in your life talking to you about how difficult it is to have 30, 35, close to 40 kids in a class, when several of them aren't able, for the most justifiable of reasons, aren't even able to speak the language properly? They've either recently arrived in Canada. We don't fail anyone, so they just keep going forward in the system regardless of what their language skills are like. Sometimes the tutoring isn't very good on getting people up to speed in terms of language. I'm just wondering if that's something that you're getting, because that's something I'm getting from several teachers, and that one feels real and that one feels important.
Yep. Yeah, I had a friend of mine who said that they had a kid in their class who came to Canada, I think, a few weeks ago. Didn't speak a lick of English, and there was no language support in the class. There was no one there helping him, translating, making sure he's understanding everything that's happening. And this teacher was saying, look, like I can tell he's falling behind, obviously, but there's nothing I can do about it. Right there, I have 30 whatever other kids. I have to keep moving forward. I have to keep teaching the content, so I don't, rather than one kid falling behind, I don't have 35 kids falling behind. So teachers, if we want to talk about how to protect our kids and do right by our kids, and how that interacts with the public education system, let's have that conversation. But I promise you, it's not about litter boxes, and it's not about trans kids. It's about, do our students have the right resources in place to help them learn, and do they have enough resources? And everything I'm hearing right now is the answer is no. And that's the real crisis, not whether they're being taught to be open and accepting to, a tiny percentage of the population or not.
Here's the question: with the amount of people that we have coming into the country, and that's not changing anytime soon. And we recently heard that there were over 800,000 students in this country were considered foreign students. I'm not saying that many or most or even some have children. But the point is that we've got new Canadians, we've got people who haven't been in the country for very long for all sorts of reasons. Kids are in school. Are we not devoting enough resources? I'm talking about nationally. Are we not devoting enough resources to what we used to simply call English as a second language? Because if people don't even understand the language that's being taught in schools, how on earth are they going to advance as quickly as they should? And how on earth aren't they going to impede the advancement of others? It just makes no sense to me that we don't seem to take English seriously.
Yeah, it feels to me a little bit like the federal government kind of stopped after it announced how many people was coming to the country. I am very much a supporter of immigration. I think it obviously has built this country. It will be what continues to build it and make it prosperous. There are obvious economies of scale as we get to 50 million, 60 million people. But if we're not helping those people when they come here, if we don't have the supports in place to help them make that transition from wherever they're coming from to our country, we're setting ourselves up to fail. We're setting ourselves up to fail because it's going to put pressure on other parts of society, whether it's the education system, whether it's housing, whether it's the labor market, and we're setting them up to fail, right? They come here, the transition isn't as smooth as it could be. Maybe they fall into bad company or bad habits, what have you, and it's just not a great situation. So it's great, it's nice that we can say that we admit more people than a lot of other countries in the world, and we have a positive attitude towards immigration. But I've said this, I've written it. That attitude is not guaranteed. It is not written in stone. And the more we take for granted the fact that people will be able to make a successful transition, I think the more we put that in jeopardy, and it just bleeds over into everything. Like you say, it bleeds over into our schools, into housing, into all sorts of places. And it jeopardizes one of the things that I think a lot of people really value about this country.
Yeah, I get tired of my own Pollyanna thinking on some of this. I'm an immigrant. I support immigration. We need immigrants. Country was built by. I mean, I get tired of of thinking all of those things, only because without supports, what does it matter? Do we have a healthcare system that can accommodate new people? Do we have enough housing to accommodate new people? Do we have enough English as a second language training to accommodate? In other words, if we don't have all of that, it's pointless to just throw a bunch of feel-good nostrums out there about how we're a country of immigrants. We are a country of immigrants. We can stipulate that, but we need to do more than that.
Yeah, and I think the social contract that we have in place around immigration in this country is that we support it because it makes this country better, and because it doesn't negatively impact our lives in any meaningful or visible way, right? And I'm sure there are people out there that would get very upset about that and say, well, that's racist, or it's not just about you, it's not just about how it impacts you, but for a lot of people it is, right? And we can't ignore the fact that support for a lot of people is conditional upon it not impacting their kids' classes or their kids' ability to get an apartment or crime or whatever it might be. And if people start making those connections between my life getting harder, my life getting sort of visibly more challenging, and our immigration policy, support for that immigration policy is going to start to drop. And the federal government, it has to do a better job on this. There are many areas where it has to do a better job right now, but this is absolutely one of them, because this sort of stuff is not written in stone, as I said. And I worry that there is a part of the sort of liberal brain, the campaign brain, that thinks, well, let's not worry about this too much, because if conservatives complain about it, we can turn that back against them, and we can call them racist, we can say they're opposed to immigration. I think that would backfire on them, but I also think it would backfire on the country. Right now, immigration is one of these few things where we seem to have a kind of bipartisan, tripartisan consensus. And if we start to put that into the same space as carbon pricing, as taxes, then it becomes politicized, and then it's your view of immigration depends on who's in government and which party you support, and that's not a good place to be. We've seen that in the United States.
I'd strongly advise any of my liberal friends to not overplay the race card. If you're gonna give room service to the right on anything, you'll definitely give it to them on that. If I, as a Canadian citizen, feel that I can't get an apartment, that I can't qualify for anything but being, number 200 or number 300 to get a hip transplant, if my kid is in a classroom that's too crowded, and if all of this is because immigration levels are not being supported by the other aspects in the social safety net, like education, like housing, like our healthcare system. So if I think that things are out of whack, and you want to accuse me of being a racist for thinking things are out of whack, I'm sorry. Immigration cannot just be about Canada needs for small businesses and large businesses to have people who will work for next to nothing. And that's why we need immigration. And it doesn't matter whether or not we have supports, because if that's what the immigration piece becomes about, as I say, you're delivering room service to people who are ideologically on the right and actually are, in many cases, racist. Max, let me go to your latest analysis piece, a tremendous piece in the National Observer, connecting the idea of cutting red tape, or what the National Conservatives call, what's that word they use? Not gatekeepers. The gatekeepers. Anyway, cutting red tape, cutting the size of government, and cutting right to the E. coli that has affected hundreds of kids, some of whom are on dialysis right now in Calgary. What's the connection between the E. coli outbreak and cutting red tape?
I think there's long been a presumption, certainly it's been presented as a presumption, that there's all these government regulations out there that they just get in the way. And if we would just cut them back, we would save money for companies, businesses would be more prosperous, and there would be no downside. It's you can have your cake and eat it too here. And we've seen time and time again that isn't true. That when you cut regulations aggressively, when you make cutting regulations the point of the exercise, you get to the bone pretty quick, and people get hurt. So we saw this in Walkerton under Mike Harris in the 90s, where one of the first things they did when they came into power was they privatized the testing of municipal water. And sure enough, a few years later, you get the Walkerton E. coli outbreak, people die, and the public inquiry that gets held into it essentially recommends we need a ton of gatekeepers around this, because drinking water is one of those things where you don't really want things to be efficient and sort of run by the market, where they are cutting as many corners as they can to be profitable. You want it to be inefficient, because inefficient means that if one level of regulation misses it, the next one will catch it, right? Sort of like the Swiss cheese analogy, where if you have a bunch of pieces of Swiss cheese stacked on top of each other that goes through one hole, it's not going to go through the other hole. So we saw that there. We saw it at Lac Megantic again, where regulations on the rail industry were inadequate. People died. Mercifully, in Calgary so far, no kids have died, and thank God for that. But I know, talking to parents who, some of them have kids in these daycares or in daycares that are adjacent, just the worry, the am I doing the right thing? What about the food in my kids' daycare? It really causes some second guessing, because you count on government to take care of this stuff. You count on government to regulate these sorts of facilities in a way that's not a thing you have to worry about, right? That's their job. And if you look at the health inspection reports for this facility in question, over and over again, it got dinged for things that cropped up later. They go one report and say, your dishwasher isn't running hot enough, or your hand sanitizer isn't mixed correctly. They come back 6 months later, the same issue would be there. This was clearly not a facility that was learning, and yet they kept it open. They didn't close it. They didn't tell parents. And so this is what happens when you have a government that is obsessed with red tape. The government of Alberta under Kenny came in and made it not a goal to make regulations better. I'm fine with that. Get rid of things that aren't good and make them better. They made it a goal to reduce the sheer number, right? We want to cut red tape by 1/3. We don't care what it is. We just want it gone. And this was inevitable in some respects. They were going to cut something that they shouldn't have cut, and something was going to fall through the cracks. So, whenever a political party tells you that it's a free lunch, that we can just cut these regulations and it'll be great for business and you don't need to worry about it, we really need to, ask some tougher questions about what is the purpose of regulation and what is the purpose of getting rid of it.
So I want to ask you specifically about housing, because we're all being told that the housing crisis is what's creating a political crisis for the Liberals, and if there's a change of government in a couple of years, it'll be because the federal government hasn't done enough to regulate the housing market. Now, in the world that I grew up in, federal government built emergency housing. Federal government built housing for people of low income. Federal government built housing for people coming back from World War II. There were lots of reasons why the federal government got involved in housing to an extent, but I never heard of this idea of the federal government creating a policy that would regulate and I guess tamp down the free market, the housing market. So help me understand, Max Fawcett, what government, whether it's a Liberal government or a Conservative government, what they should be doing long term to create housing affordability. And the immigration piece, I think, has to be part of this.
Yeah, so there's two levers here. There's demand and there's supply, and both of them have gotten out of whack on this issue. Demand has been sort of supercharged by the number of temporary foreign residents that are coming here, oftentimes under the auspices of getting an education, but really using those educations to get a foothold for citizenship down the road. And of course, they bring money into the country to rent, to buy, to live, and that takes supply off the market. So that's part of the demand side. The other part is foreign investment, which they've done a pretty good job of cracking down a little bit on in BC and markets like that. I think they were late to the game, but they are at least in the game. It's on the supply side that governments have really kind of been asleep at the switch. And, to some extent, I understand why. Prior to COVID, this didn't look nearly as out of control as it is. I mean, I've been complaining about the high cost of housing in Toronto and Vancouver for as long as most of my friends have known me. I was predicting a housing crash in Vancouver back in the early 2000s. Shows what I know. But housing has always been expensive in those very desirable markets. What hasn't been the case is that housing has been expensive everywhere, right? And now, housing is expensive in Chilliwack. It's expensive in Port Hope. It's expensive in Truro, Nova Scotia. It's everywhere. And the rental market is particularly crazy. When I moved back to Vancouver in 2015 to become the editor of Vancouver Magazine, I got a 1-bedroom apartment in the Olympic Village for $1,500. Right?
Wow,
not a big apartment, but
so,
it was
what
fine.
year was that, Max? That sounds so cheap. How long ago was that?
2015.
Really?
Right?
Just
And
8 years ago.
Now, I mean, I assume it would be at least $3,000, probably more. So, to me, the rental market is the one that is the most dire because, you don't have to buy. And I've always sort of been an advocate that renting can be a pretty smart strategy, but renting is disastrous right now because the rental market, the rental vacancy rates are near zero almost everywhere. Landlords have all the power. And there's just not supply coming on to meet this growing surge of demand. So that's where I think the feds really need to focus their attention. They have finally, with waiving the GST on new purpose-built rentals. That's, I've seen a bunch of developers on Twitter saying, that is immediately transformative. That takes a bunch of projects they had that didn't make economic sense and puts them immediately into, well, we'll build those right now. But that's going to take years to show up, right? All that supply that is now sort of being brought into play will take a long time. And I in the interim, people are still suffering. Rents are still going to keep climbing. So it's a really tricky political challenge because it is, like you say, it's unless they dedicate themselves to building wartime housing, really kind of like prefab, quick build, throw them up and get them in there, there's not going to be a solution that people will see before the next election. Part of me thinks that that's the bed that the federal Liberals have made for themselves, and they're going to have to lie in it one way or the other. But the one thing that's encouraging to me about all this is that everyone finally takes this seriously. People like me have been kind of writing and talking about housing for a decade now, and it's kind of been ignored because most elected officials own their own homes. And so any increase in prices really doesn't seem like a bad thing to them. They now, I think, get it. They get that it jeopardizes their political survival. We saw that in Calgary over the weekend here. There was this housing strategy that was brought before council where they're going to get rid of parking minimums and they're going to get rid of zoning minimums, which, they're going to blanket upzone the entire city, which that would never have passed 6 months ago. The outcry from the established neighborhoods and the political interests that support them would have been too great, and it just got bulldozed. And it got bulldozed by
just so I'm clear on this, Max. Are you basically saying that neighborhoods where you only had single family homes like bungalows or 2 stories that resisted the idea of condo development, apartment development? Are you saying that many of those neighborhoods are no longer going to be resisting, and so a bunch of 6-story and maybe 12-story buildings will be going into those areas?
I'm not even sure they'll be that tall. I mean, it's really more about duplexes and triplexes and things like that. But the voices in those communities used to be very, very powerful in the city. I mean, in Calgary, it took years for them to even allow people to have secondary suites in their house because, again, the sort of vested interests of the single family homeowners didn't want renters in their neighborhoods. And so they fought it for years. But what we saw at council over the Friday and Saturday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, was just this alliance of young progressives, old conservatives, the business community, everyone coming to bat and saying, we need this right now. We don't have time for this to listen to, your objections about the character of your community or what it's going to do to that tree down the corner. We need to build more housing right now. And it just got bulldozed. And I think that's hugely encouraging. You have a situation at the federal level where there is no daylight really right now between Pierre Poilievre, Jagmeet Singh, and Justin Trudeau on the need for more housing. So, those sorts of situations can really move the markers on the football field quite quickly. And we'll see how far we can get on housing over the next couple of years. But it's clear that, the sense of urgency has never been greater.
So CMHC says that Canada has to build about 500,000 homes to get a handle on affordability. And right now, I think we're building close to 300,000. I don't know how we can get from 300,000 to 500,000 quickly, but we're also being told that we need to bring in 500,000 new people a year. That's the immigration number. Is there a way to square the circle?
Probably not. There was a note from one of the big banks. I want to say it was BMO, but it might have been Scotia. Anyways, their chief economist saying basically there's no hope in hell that we're going to meet this target just because of the mismatch between the labor market and the need to build new homes and just the math doesn't work. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try. I think aspiring to hit that target, just because even if we don't hit the target, getting closer will meaningfully help a lot of people. And the closer we can get, the more people we can help. But I do think there's an opportunity there to kind of align our immigration policy around the needs of building all these homes. We have a shortage of skilled trades in this country. We should be trying to bring in as many skilled trades as we possibly can. I mean, look, tech entrepreneurs are great. They create a lot of wealth. I think everyone wants to have a tech entrepreneur living in their neighborhood. But the truth of the matter is we don't need them right now as much as we need a carpenter or a bricklayer or a drywaller. We need those people much more urgently, especially because, a tech entrepreneur is going to come here and bid up housing. It's going to add fuel to that fire. So I do think we should be adjusting our immigration policy to kind of meet the needs of our biggest need right now, which is housing. And I also think, and God help me, I'm going to sound like a conservative here, but we need to be telling our young people, not that it's better to get a skilled trade than it is to get a Bachelor of Arts or go get a university education, but to tell them you don't need to get a university education. It's not necessary to participate in society. And so if you're one of those people who is good with their hands, who loves to build things, who wants to make a living for themselves that way, we should be careful that we're not sort of implicitly shaming them away from that choice, because the truth of the matter is, look, you can do fine as a someone who gets a BA. I'm living proof, sort of, but the market right now clearly needs those other skills even more. And so if that's your passion, you should go pursue it.
And I think we should also tell them, and I don't mind sounding like a conservative, because that's at the core what I am. Take the culture war crap out, because that's what turns me off about modern day conservatism. And if there's been a divorce between conservatism and me, it's because I reject the culture war stuff. But as far as entrepreneurship and free enterprise, rah. And I think that young people ought to be taught that if you want to have an independent life, you want to be able to work for yourself, the best way and fastest way to do that is to learn a skill. There is absolutely nothing wrong with plumbing, with carpentry, with masonry. I could go on and on and on. The fact is, the people who have those kinds of skills are the people who have the easiest access to capital to create small businesses and run their own lives.
Absolutely. I mean, not that I would, go back to high school and do it all over again. I would become a plumber, because I'm terrible with that stuff. It's just not in me. But, I remember when I was doing newspaper stuff in a small town in northern BC, and I had a mom come talk to me and said, my son wants to ask you a question. He's curious about what he should do with his life. And I was like, I'm not sure I'm the guy to ask, but sure, I'll answer. And he said, I'm thinking of going and becoming a plumber. Do you think I should go get a university education? And I said, look, I was 29 at the time. I'm up here in, Chetwynd, BC, working as the editor of a community newspaper. I'm having a great time. But let me tell you about my friend in high school who didn't go to university, became a plumber. He owns 3 houses now, right? So if you love plumbing, don't let anyone ever tell you that it's not the thing to do. And like you said, if you want to be free, if you want to be able to travel, live anywhere you want, set your own hours, get a skilled trade, because the demand for that stuff isn't going anywhere. AI can't replace it. You're kind of bulletproof on that front. So, that's one of those things where I guess I depart from the conventional wisdom of my tribe.
Appreciate it. Appreciate it every time you do depart from the conventional wisdom, because that's what makes your toolkit interesting. Thanks for bringing it to us again. Max Fawcett of the National Observer.
Anytime, Charles.
Max Fawcett is based in Calgary. I appreciate everyone who is getting online with us. Subscribe, follow the Charles Adler Show podcast. Go to your favorite platform, Spotify, Apple, Google, you name it. Thank you. I'm Charles Adler.